It's strange how a single sentence can flip a switch in your head and suddenly make years of "maybe it's just me" snap into focus. For me, it was my dad leaning back in his chair at my sister's rehearsal dinner, smiling like he was being reasonable and saying, "Robert, you're kind of ruining the mood here." Not yelling, not angry, just calm. Final. Like a verdict. I'm 31, by the way. Old enough to know when I'm being quietly pushed out of my own family. I should probably rewind a bit, because that line didn't come out of nowhere. Families don't usually implode over one dinner unless there's been pressure building for a long time. In ours, the pressure started the day my dad remarried, about 10 years ago, and never really let up. My mom passed when I was in college, and within 2 years my dad met Karen. That's my stepmom. She's the type of person who smiles constantly, uses a soft voice, and somehow makes everything sound like concern even when it's clearly criticism. If you push back, she looks wounded. If you don't, she keeps going. My sister Emily was 16 when Karen came into the picture. I was 21 and already mostly out of the house, working and finishing school. Emily adapted fast. Too fast, honestly. Karen doted on her, called her my girl, bragged about her to anyone who would listen. I became background, not openly disliked, just inconvenient. Like a chair in the room that someone keeps bumping into and sighing at. At first I thought it was temporary. Grief does weird things to families. I told myself Dad was trying to keep the peace. I told myself Karen just needed time. Years passed. Nothing changed. If anything, the gap widened. Emily and Karen became a unit. Dad followed their lead. I learned how to keep my opinions to myself, how to laugh at jokes that landed wrong, how to show up with a gift and leave before things got uncomfortable. By the time Emily got engaged, I was already bracing myself. Weddings have a way of dragging every unspoken family issue into the open and seating them together at round tables. Still, I wanted to be there for my sister. Despite everything, I loved her. Or at least I loved the version of her from before all this. When she asked me to come to the rehearsal dinner, I took it as a good sign. An olive branch. Maybe even an attempt at normalcy. The dinner was at this upscale Italian place downtown. Private room, linen tablecloths, dim lighting. The kind of place where the servers introduce themselves and the menus don't have prices. I showed up early, partly out of nerves, partly because I've learned it's better to arrive before the room fills with energy that you don't quite fit into. I brought a card for Emily and her fiancé, something simple and sincere. I rehearsed what I'd say in my head so I wouldn't come off stiff or distant. Karen noticed me the moment I walked in. She always does. Her smile flickered for just a second before she smoothed it out and came over to hug me. Light and quick, like it was a formality she wanted to get through. "Robert," she said softly, "you made it." Not, "I'm glad you're here." Just acknowledgement. Dad clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Good to see you, son." But his eyes were already scanning the room, checking tables, making sure everything was running smoothly. Emily was busy with her friends and bridesmaids, glowing, laughing, fully in her element. I waited for a moment, then caught her attention and gave her a quick hug. She thanked me for coming, distracted but polite. That was it. At first, things were fine. Small talk, drinks, stories about how Emily and her fiancé met, stories I'd heard before but listened to anyway. I tried to stay neutral, agreeable. The less friction, the better. But I could feel it creeping in, that familiar sense of being slightly off script. Like everyone else had rehearsed their lines, and I was improvising. It started with little things. Karen correcting me, gently, when I mentioned an old family vacation. "Oh, it wasn't like that," she said, smiling, even though she hadn't been there. Emily rolling her eyes when I laughed at something Dad said. One of Karen's relatives asking me what I do now, then nodding politely and turning away mid-sentence when someone more interesting walked by. I told myself not to read into it. I focused on my plate. I sipped my drink slowly. I reminded myself this night wasn't about me. But then Emily's fiancé's parents started talking about family traditions, about how important it was to have everyone together, united, supportive. Karen jumped in immediately, talking about how close-knit we all were, how much she valued harmony. She said it while glancing at me, just briefly, like she was checking whether I was going to contradict her. I didn't. I never do. But something in me tightened anyway. At some point, Dad asked me how work was going. A normal question. I answered honestly but briefly. Before I could finish, Karen leaned in and said, in that same gentle tone, "You know, Robert's always had trouble sticking with one thing. She laughed lightly, like it was an affectionate joke. A few people chuckled. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I looked at Dad, waiting. He smiled awkwardly and took a sip of his wine. No correction. No, that's not fair. Just silence. That's when I said, maybe a little too sharply. Actually, I've been at the same company for 4 years now. Not loud. Not rude. Just factual. The table went quiet for half a second too long. Karen tilted her head and said, "See? So defensive. We're just having fun." And then Dad sighed. Not dramatically. Just enough to be noticeable. He leaned back, folded his hands, and said it. "Robert, you're kind of ruining the mood here." It felt like the air left the room. I remember thinking, absurdly, that the lighting suddenly seemed harsher. I opened my mouth, then closed it. I wasn't even sure what I would say. I wasn't angry yet. I was stunned, embarrassed, shrunk down to the size of a problem that needed managing. Karen leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper, meant only for me. "You're embarrassing yourself," she said. "Let's not make this about you." That's when I stood up. I didn't make a speech. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I pushed my chair in quietly, picked up my jacket, and said, "I'm going to head out. Congratulations, Emily." My voice sounded calm, even to me. Detached. Like it belonged to someone else. For a moment, no one stopped me. Then Emily looked up, confused, and asked, "Wait, what?" Dad started to say my name, but I was already walking toward the door. Karen didn't follow. She just watched me go, her expression unreadable. As I reached the hallway outside the private room, I could still hear laughter starting up again behind me, forced and brittle. I told myself I'd done the mature thing, that leaving quietly was better than staying and letting things escalate. But as I stepped out into the cool night air, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check the phone right away. I stood there on the sidewalk outside the restaurant for a full minute, just breathing, listening to the muffled sound of traffic and the faint hum of conversation leaking out every time the door opened. Part of me hoped the buzz had been nothing important. Another part already knew better. My phone had a way of vibrating only when something was about to get worse. When I finally looked, it was a text from my dad. Just 4 words. "Let's talk tomorrow." That sentence has always meant the same thing in my family. It doesn't mean discussion. It doesn't mean understanding. It means a decision has already been made, and tomorrow is when you're expected to accept it quietly. I typed back, "Sure," because that's what I always do. Then I put my phone away and drove home feeling like I'd just been politely escorted out of something I was never really part of to begin with. The next morning, I woke up with that familiar heaviness in my chest, the kind that makes even small tasks feel unnecessary. I replayed the dinner over and over in my head, analyzing every word I'd said, every expression I'd made, searching for the moment where I'd supposedly crossed some invisible line. I kept coming back to the same conclusion. I hadn't done anything wrong. And somehow, that made it worse. Dad called around noon. Not a video call. Not an invitation to come over. Just a phone call, like he was handling a minor administrative issue. He didn't waste time easing into it. "Last night got awkward," he said. I waited. "Karen feels like you came in with a chip on your shoulder," he continued. "Emily noticed it too. This is a stressful time for her, Robert. We really need everyone to be supportive." Supportive. That word again. I asked him, calmly, what exactly I'd done that was unsupportive. There was a pause. Papers rustling. A sigh. He mentioned my tone. My defensiveness. The way I challenged Karen in front of other people. When I reminded him that she'd taken a shot at my career first, he said, "She didn't mean it that way." I told him how it felt to be whispered to be told I was embarrassing myself. He didn't deny it happened. He just said, "You know how she is." She was trying to keep things calm. Something in me cracked then. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just enough to let the truth seep in. Calm, in this family, had always meant me staying quiet. Before we hung up, he added, almost as an afterthought, "We should probably talk about the wedding logistics soon." I asked what he meant. "Well," he said carefully, "after last night, Karen thinks it might be better if you take a step back. You know, just to avoid any distractions." Distractions. Like I was a flickering light they hadn't managed to fix yet. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I just said I understood and ended the call. I sat there afterward, staring at my blank TV screen, feeling that old mix of anger and sadness swirl together until it was hard to tell them apart. Over the next few weeks, The distance became obvious. Group chats went quiet whenever I replied. Wedding updates came secondhand or not at all. When I asked Emily directly if everything was okay, she said she was just busy and stressed and didn't have time for family drama. That phrase stung more than she probably realized. To her, I wasn't family. I was drama. Then came the invitations. I found out from a cousin that the seating chart had been finalized. Apparently, there had been a long discussion about where to put me. Karen had suggested a table near the back, with people Robert might be more comfortable around. Dad agreed. Emily didn't object. When I heard that, something inside me went cold. I wasn't being excluded outright. I was being managed. A few days later, Dad invited me over. In person this time. I should have known that meant something bigger was coming. Karen was there, of course, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea she didn't drink, hands folded like she was about to deliver bad news in the most reasonable way possible. Dad stood near the counter, arms crossed, avoiding my eyes. Karen started. "We've been thinking a lot about the rehearsal dinner," she said gently, "and about patterns." Patterns. Another favorite word. I asked her to explain. She talked about how I tend to withdraw, how my presence sometimes shifts the energy in a room. She said it wasn't intentional, but intentions didn't matter if the impact was negative. Dad nodded along, like he was listening to a weather report. Then she said it. "Because of that, we think it might be best if you don't attend some of the wedding events." Some. Not all. Carefully chosen words. I asked which ones. She glanced at Dad. He cleared his throat. "The morning prep. The family photos. Probably the reception speeches." I laughed. Once, before I could stop myself. It came out sharp and humorless. "So basically, everything where I might be visible." Karen's expression tightened just a bit. "We're not punishing you," she said. "We're protecting Emily." That's when I realized something important. This wasn't about the rehearsal dinner. It wasn't about my tone or my attitude or even Karen's feelings. This was about control. About curating an image of a perfect family and quietly removing any piece that didn't fit the picture. I told them I needed time to think. Dad seemed relieved. Karen smiled like we'd made progress. On my way out, I noticed a stack of folders on the counter. Wedding-related paperwork, guest lists, vendor contracts. One folder, slightly open, had my name on a sticky note. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The message was already clear. That night, Emily called me. I thought, for a moment, that she might finally say something honest. Instead, she sounded tired and irritated. She told me Mom would have wanted us to keep the peace. She told me Karen had done so much for the wedding and didn't deserve to feel attacked. She told me, flat out, that my presence was becoming a problem. I asked her if she really believed that. She hesitated, just long enough to answer without lying outright. "I just need this to be easy," she said. After that, things escalated quickly. Invitations for extended family events stopped coming. My name disappeared from email chains. When I asked Dad about the rehearsal dinner incident being blown out of proportion, he said, "It's not about that one night. It's about trust." Trust. From the people who'd been quietly rewriting my role in the family for years. The breaking point came a week later, when I received an email from the wedding planner. It wasn't meant for me. I knew that immediately, but it had my name in the subject line. Robert's attendance, confirmation needed. The email outlined revised plans, revised seating, revised participation, and then, near the bottom, a line that made my stomach drop. Per family request, Robert will not be listed as immediate family in the program. Immediate family. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands shaking, realizing this wasn't just emotional sidelining anymore. This was erasure. A deliberate decision to redefine me out of the family narrative entirely. Before I could even process it, my phone rang. It was Dad. He didn't sound angry. He didn't sound apologetic. He sounded resolved. "We need to talk about something important," he said. "It's better you hear it from me." I asked him what it was. There was a pause, longer than usual. Then he said, "Karen and I have decided to make a few changes moving forward. About responsibilities and expectations." That's when I understood. Whatever he was about to say wasn't just about the wedding. It was about everything that came after. And as he started to explain, my chest tightened, because I knew I was about to hear the one thing that would finally make it impossible to pretend this was all a misunderstanding. I don't remember every word Dad said after that, but I remember how my body reacted before my brain caught up. My shoulders tensed. My jaw locked. That dull ringing started in my ears, the same one I used to get right before exams I knew I was going to fail. It's funny how the body recognizes danger faster than pride does. He talked about boundaries, about moving forward, about how Karen and Emily felt it would be healthier if expectations were adjusted so no one felt disappointed later. Then he finally said the part that landed like a dropped plate. They were revising the will. Not because I'd done something catastrophic, not because of some big betrayal, but because, in his words, the family structure has changed. Emily would be taking on more responsibility. Karen needed security. Things needed to be simplified. Simplified. That was the word he used to explain why my share of anything meaningful was being quietly reduced to almost nothing. I asked him, calmly, what that meant for me. He said it didn't mean I was being cut off, just rebalanced. He emphasized that word like it was generous, like I should be grateful for whatever scraps of connection were still being offered. I hung up after that. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just said, okay, because at that point, there was nothing left to defend. You can't defend your place in a family that's already decided you're optional. That night was bad. I won't dress it up. I sat on my couch in the dark long after midnight, scrolling through old photos I hadn't looked at in years. Birthdays, holidays, pictures of my mom, back when the family still felt like something solid. I realized how long I'd been trying to earn a version of belonging that no longer existed. The worst part wasn't the money or the wedding or even the humiliation. It was the clarity, the sudden, brutal understanding that if I disappeared tomorrow, the inconvenience would be minimal. They'd adjust. They'd explain it away. They'd move on. That thought sat heavy in my chest for days. I stopped reaching out. Not dramatically. I just didn't initiate. No texts. No calls. If someone messaged me, I replied politely and briefly. The silence stretched, and no one rushed to fill it. That told me everything I needed to know. Work started slipping. I missed a deadline. Then another. My manager pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay. I told him I was dealing with some family stuff. He nodded, understanding, and gave me a week to get back on track. That week passed in a blur of sleepless nights and half-finished meals. Rock bottom doesn't always announce itself with fireworks. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's realizing you've worn the same hoodie 3 days in a row because you can't be bothered to change. The turning point came on a Tuesday afternoon, of all times. I was sitting in my car during lunch, staring at my phone, when a message came through from an unfamiliar number. It was my aunt on my mom's side. We hadn't talked much since Dad remarried. I assumed she didn't want to get involved. Her message was simple. I heard what's been happening. Want to grab coffee? I almost didn't go. Old habits die hard, and part of me expected another lecture about keeping the peace. But something told me this was different. We met at a small cafe near my office. She hugged me tightly. No hesitation, no awkwardness. It felt grounding. She listened while I talked. Really listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't reframe my feelings into something more convenient. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "Your mother would be furious." That made me laugh for the first time in weeks. A real laugh. Because she was right. She told me things I didn't know. About how my mom had insisted, years ago, that anything they built together be protected equally for both kids. About how she'd worried, even back then, about what might happen if Dad remarried too quickly. About conversations I was never meant to hear, but probably should have. Then she said something that stuck with me. You've been waiting for them to treat you fairly. You don't need their permission to live well. It wasn't some grand motivational speech. Just a quiet statement of fact. And for some reason, that landed harder than anything else. After that, I started doing small things differently. Nothing dramatic. I cleaned my apartment properly. I went back to the gym, even though I felt awkward and out of shape. I stopped checking the family group chat, muted it entirely. I focused on work, stayed late a few evenings, caught up on what I'd missed. Opportunities have a strange way of showing up when you stop begging for approval. A project I'd been working on quietly for months suddenly gained traction. A senior manager noticed my work and pulled me into a meeting. He asked if I'd be interested in leading a small team on a new initiative. It wasn't flashy, but it was real responsibility. And for the first time in a long while, someone was trusting me without conditions. I poured myself into it, not to prove anything to my family, but because it felt good to be competent again, capable, necessary. Around that time, Emily sent me a message. Short, neutral. She asked if I was okay, said things were stressful, hoped there were no hard feelings. I stared at the text for a long time before replying. Then I wrote back, "I'm focusing on my own stuff right now. Hope the wedding planning is going well." It was true, and it was the first boundary I'd ever set without apologizing for it. Weeks passed. The wedding got closer. I heard updates through distant relatives and social media. Dress fittings, bachelor party photos, smiling group shots where I was noticeably absent. It hurt, but not in the same raw way. The pain had shifted. It was quieter, more manageable. Then, one evening, Dad showed up at my apartment unannounced. I almost didn't open the door, but curiosity won. He looked older than I remembered, tired. He didn't come in right away, just stood there, awkward, like a guest who wasn't sure he was welcome. We talked about nothing for a few minutes. The weather, traffic, work. Then he finally said, "Karen's been under a lot of stress." I waited. He told me the wedding budget had ballooned, that there were disagreements, that Emily was overwhelmed, that Karen felt unappreciated. The subtext was clear. Things weren't as perfect as they tried to make them look. Then he said, "We might need your help with something." There it was. The shift, the subtle change in tone. The first time in months I was being addressed not as a problem, but as a resource. I didn't answer right away. I looked at him and realized something important. This was the first time he'd come to me without Karen prompting him, without a script. He looked uncertain. I told him I'd think about it. After he left, I sat down and opened my laptop. Not to answer him, but to review some documents I'd quietly requested weeks earlier. Financial statements, old emails, things I'd never paid attention to before because I trusted that fairness was automatic. It wasn't. And as I started connecting dots, I realized my fall hadn't just stripped things away. It had given me clarity, information, leverage. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to how they treated me. I was preparing for what came next. And they had no idea. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. That was the strangest part. I hadn't uncovered some dramatic secret yet, nothing that would make a courtroom gasp or a movie audience lean forward. What I had was quieter than that. Paper trails, timelines, small inconsistencies that, when lined up properly, told a very different story than the one I'd been fed my entire adult life. I started slow, careful. I wasn't trying to get back at anyone yet. Honestly, at that point, I wasn't even sure what revenge would look like. I just knew I was done being confused. The first thing I did was request copies of documents I technically had every right to see. Old estate planning drafts, emails from years ago where my mom and dad discussed finances. I framed it neutrally, professionally. No accusations, no emotion, just organizing my records. Dad didn't question it. Karen didn't even know yet. That alone told me something. What I found wasn't explosive on its own. It was revealing. My mom had been meticulous. Everything she did financially had a paper trail. She'd insisted on certain protections, certain distributions, long before she got sick. She hadn't trusted verbal promises. She'd trusted ink. And then there was a gap, a noticeable one. A period after she passed, before Karen officially moved in, where changes were discussed but not finalized. Drafts rewritten, clauses softened, language shifted from firm to flexible. None of it illegal, none of it accidental either. Emily's name appeared more and more frequently. Mine less so. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't mention it to Dad. I just kept digging. At the same time, I quietly started rebuilding relationships I'd let wither. My aunt, a cousin who'd always been polite but distant. Even one of Dad's old friends who'd known my parents before everything changed. I didn't show up angry or wounded. I asked questions. Listened more than I spoke. People talk more than they realize when they think they're helping. One afternoon, my aunt invited me over for dinner. Just us. Halfway through, she casually mentioned something Karen had said years ago at a family gathering. About making sure things eventually go where they're most appreciated. At the time, everyone had laughed it off. In hindsight, it sounded less like a joke and more like a plan. I thanked her. I didn't react much, but I wrote it down when I got home. Meanwhile, Dad's request for help lingered in the background. He texted a few times. Always vague. Let me know. Things are hectic. We could really use your perspective. The more distant I stayed, the more his tone softened. Less authority, more appeal. Eventually, I agreed to meet him for coffee. We sat across from each other, cups cooling between us. He looked relieved just to have me there. He talked about logistics, about a vendor issue, about some payments that needed to be sorted. He hinted, carefully, that my organizational skills might be useful. I listened. I asked questions, neutral ones. And then, casually, I asked who was officially managing the wedding finances. He hesitated. Karen's been overseeing most of it, he said. With Emily, of course. Of course. I nodded, like that was expected. Then I mentioned, offhandedly, that I'd noticed some discrepancies when I was reviewing older family financial records for my own planning. I didn't accuse. I didn't specify. I just let the idea exist. Dad stiffened slightly. Not enough that someone else would notice. Enough that I did. From that moment on, I knew two things. First, there were things he wasn't fully aware of. Second, he didn't like the idea that I might be more informed than he assumed. After that, I stayed helpful. Strategically so. I helped draft an email to a vendor. I reviewed a timeline. I offered to coordinate something minor that took pressure off Karen. Each small contribution made me seem useful again. Harmless. Reintegrated. Karen noticed, eventually. She started including me in group messages again. Praised my initiative. Told Dad how nice it was that I was being supportive. I could practically hear the recalibration happening in her head. What she didn't realize was that I was observing everything. The way decisions were framed. The way credit flowed upward and blame flowed outward. The way Emily deferred to Karen more than she realized. The way Dad stayed just detached enough to claim ignorance later. I also noticed something else. Stress cracks. The wedding budget wasn't just ballooning. It was bleeding. Payments overlapping. Refunds delayed. Assumptions being made that money would work itself out. Karen was confident, but confidence isn't the same as control. One evening, while helping reconcile a list of expenses, I saw it. A payment that didn't align with the timeline. A deposit made earlier than expected from an account that wasn't supposed to be touched yet. It wasn't huge, but it was premature. I said nothing. Instead, I quietly asked my aunt to connect me with her financial advisor. Not to accuse, just to ask questions. Hypothetical ones. About trusts. About amendments. About what happens when intent and execution don't fully align. The answers were enlightening. Around this time, Emily reached out again. This time, her message was longer. She said she missed me. Said things had gotten complicated. Said she felt caught in the middle. I believed her. I also recognized the timing. I replied kindly. Carefully. I didn't reopen old wounds. I didn't apologize either. I was building something fragile. I wasn't about to knock it over by rushing. The real shift happened the day Karen asked me, directly, to help review some documents. She framed it as trust, as growth, as moving forward. She said she appreciated my calm presence lately. I smiled, took the folder, promised to look it over. That night, alone at my kitchen table, I compared those documents to the older drafts I already had. And there it was. Not a smoking gun. Not something dramatic enough to confront someone with immediately, but a clear divergence. A subtle change that favored one narrative over another. A choice that benefited some people and quietly erased protections for others. Me specifically. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling for a long time. This wasn't about punishing anyone. Not really. It was about balance. About correcting something that had been nudged, little by little, until it no longer resembled fairness. I wasn't angry the way I'd been before. I was calm, focused, almost detached. I started making a list. Not of grievances. Of options. Scenarios. Outcomes. What would happen if I stayed silent? What would happen if I spoke up? What would happen if I waited? Timing mattered. The wedding was close. Emotions were high. Everyone was invested in appearances that made certain truths more powerful than they would be at any other moment. I didn't know yet exactly how it would unfold. I just knew this. They believed I was back in my old role. The quiet one. The accommodating one. The one who would smooth things over and step aside when asked. They were wrong. And as I closed my laptop and turned off the kitchen light, I realized I wasn't waiting to be included anymore. I was waiting for the moment when the truth would matter more than their version of the story. The morning of the wedding arrived with an odd stillness. Not calm, just quiet in the way a room gets right before something breaks. I woke up early, earlier than I had in months, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel that familiar weight in my chest. I felt steady. I'd already made my decision. The night before, I sent a single email. Polite, professional, addressed to the wedding planner, Dad, Karen, and copied to Emily. No accusations. No drama. Just a request to confirm a few discrepancies I'd noticed in the finalized documents, specifically the financial authorizations and the family designation language in the printed program. I attached supporting files, old drafts, time-stamped emails, notes from my mom that I'd never seen before but now understood fully. I ended the email with one sentence. I believe these need to be corrected before the ceremony to ensure everything reflects the original intent. I slept better that night than I had in years. By the time I arrived at the venue, my phone had already blown up. Missed calls, messages sent, then deleted, then sent again. I ignored all of them. I parked, straightened my jacket, and walked in like I belonged there, because I did. The venue was chaos. Not loud chaos, but the kind you recognize when smiles are forced and conversations keep getting interrupted. Staff whispered. The wedding planner looked pale. Emily was in a side room, sitting stiffly while someone touched up her makeup she didn't need fixed. Karen spotted me first. She walked toward me quickly, her usual composure cracked just enough to show panic underneath. "Robert," she said, low and urgent, "we need to talk. Right now." I nodded. "Calm." "Sure." We stepped into a small conference room off the main hall. Dad was already there. Emily followed a moment later, confused and tense. Karen closed the door. Dad spoke first. "Why would you send that email?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry. It was shaken. "Because it was accurate," I said, "and because it needed to be addressed before things went any further." Karen jumped in immediately. She accused me of bad timing, of trying to sabotage Emily's big day, of misunderstanding documents I weren't trained to interpret. She said I was overreacting again, creating drama where there didn't need to be any. I let her finish. Then I slid the folder I'd brought across the table. "I didn't interpret anything," I said. "I compared it, line by line. These were Mom's terms. These were the revisions. And these," I tapped the last page, "are the changes made after you moved in." Changes Dad didn't fully understand at the time. Emily stared at the papers, her hands trembling slightly. "What is this?" she asked. "It's the reason I was suddenly a distraction," I said. "It's why I was quietly removed from programs and photos and conversations. It's why my presence became inconvenient." Karen laughed, sharp and brittle. "This is ridiculous. Your mother's gone. Things evolve. They don't evolve accidentally," I said. "They evolve because someone nudges them." Dad picked up the papers. His face changed as he read. Confusion first, then something closer to realization. He looked at Karen. "You told me this was consistent with what we'd discussed." Karen's voice softened instantly. "It was. I was protecting the family." "No," I said. "You were protecting control." Emily finally looked up. "You told me Robert didn't care," she said quietly, to Karen. "You said he didn't want to be involved." Karen hesitated, just for a second too long. The silence did the rest. The wedding planner knocked on the door, her expression tight. "We need to resolve the program issue," she said. "There are legal concerns. If this isn't corrected, we may need to delay the ceremony." Delay. The word Karen had been dreading. Dad set the papers down slowly. "Karen," he said, "did you change these without fully explaining them to me?" She tried to deflect, to reframe, to cry, but it didn't land the same way anymore. Not with documents on the table. Not with Emily watching her carefully for the first time in years. The fallout was swift. The ceremony was delayed by 45 minutes. Programs were reprinted, seating adjusted, the official language restored. I was listed as immediate family, not as a favor, as a correction. Karen didn't sit in the front row. She didn't make a speech either. The reception was quieter than expected. Polite, controlled. People sensed something had shifted, even if they didn't know exactly what. Karen stayed close to Dad, but not comfortably. Emily hugged me during dinner, longer than necessary, and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Dad apologized later. Not perfectly, not eloquently, but honestly. He admitted he'd let peacekeeping turn into avoidance. He admitted he'd trusted the wrong voice because it was easier. Karen left early. In the weeks that followed, the changes continued. The will was revised again, this time with transparency. Boundaries were set. Not dramatically, but firmly. Karen lost influence she'd quietly accumulated. Family gatherings changed shape. Some people drifted. Others returned. As for me, I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I didn't cut anyone off. I just stopped shrinking. I kept my distance where it was healthy. I showed up where it mattered. I invested in the life I'd rebuilt during my fall. The one that didn't depend on approval or silence or being easy to manage. Revenge, I learned, doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's just standing still while the truth finally catches up. And the best part? I didn't have to leave quietly ever again. My name's Adam. I'm 26 now, but this story starts when I was 17, the kind of age where you're just old enough to know what you want, but still too young for anyone in your family to take you seriously. At least, that's how it was in my house. I grew up in a cramped 3-bedroom outside of Cincinnati, the kind of place where dreams felt like a luxury we couldn't afford. My parents, Mike and Angela, were both born and raised in the same neighborhood we lived in. My mom worked front desk at a dental clinic, and my dad bounced between contracting jobs and long stretches of unemployment that he blamed on the system or unfair competition. My older sister, Sarah, was the golden child, pretty, popular, and married to some local car dealership manager by the time she was 21. She never left the city limits except for beach vacations or weddings. And me? I was the quiet kid, the one with posters of cities on my wall and language books stacked under my bed. The one who, apparently, was always trying too hard. It started with a comment at dinner. I remember it clear as day. We were eating spaghetti, cheap, overcooked, with the sauce from a can, and I told them I wanted to study abroad for college. I'd been researching scholarships and grants for months in secret. I'd even started practicing Italian on my own. I was nervous to bring it up, but I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd surprise me. Instead, my mom laughed, actually laughed, and said, "That's for kids with connections, not you." My dad shook his head and muttered something about getting ideas above my station. Sarah snorted and added, "What? You think you're going to be some international hotshot now? Please." I felt my face burn, not from embarrassment, but from something colder. The kind of disappointment that settles into your ribs and makes it hard to breathe. I didn't even finish my plate. I just excused myself, went to my room, and stared at my ceiling for hours. That was the first time I realized I wasn't just on my own, I was actively being held back. They didn't believe in me, not even a little. Worse, they didn't want me to do better than them. They wanted me to stay in that small town, pick up a trade, maybe marry a waitress, and eventually inherit my dad's rusted toolbox like it was some kind of heirloom. But I didn't say anything. Not then. I smiled the next morning. I went to school. I helped my dad clean the garage that weekend like nothing had happened. But something had. A switch flipped. I started saving every penny I could. I got a job at the local grocery store, bagging groceries after school and stocking shelves until midnight on Fridays. I tutored kids in math on the weekends. I sold old books and electronics on Craigslist. Every dollar I earned went into a hidden shoebox duct-taped beneath the floorboard under my bed. I kept my grades up, applied to every scholarship I could find, and when rejection letters came in, because plenty did, I didn't let them break me. The few that were promising, I followed up on. I wrote essays. I made calls. I hustled in a way my family never saw because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of watching me struggle. At home, things got colder. They noticed I was pulling away, but they chalked it up to teenage mood swings. I stopped asking for help. I paid for my own clothes, my own books, even my own phone plan. When I finally got accepted into a study abroad program in Florence, with a nearly full-ride scholarship, I didn't even tell them until the plane ticket was booked and I had my visa in hand. The night I told them, I sat them down in the living room. My dad was half watching a rerun of Pawn Stars, and my mom was scrolling through Facebook. I said it straight. I got into a university in Italy. I leave in August. There was a silence. A long one. My dad paused the TV. My mom blinked, like I'd spoken in another language. Sarah, who happened to be visiting with her baby on her hip, just said, "You're joking." "No," I said. "I worked for it. I leave in 2 months." My dad scoffed. "So what? You're just gonna abandon your family? Go run off to Europe like some spoiled brat?" Spoiled. That was rich. I hadn't asked them for a dime. Not once. "You think you're better than us?" my mom asked. Her voice had that edge, that simmering resentment I'd started to recognize over the years. "You think going off to some fancy school makes you something special?" I didn't answer. I just stood there, calm, collected. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head, but in real life, it felt sad. Not victorious. Not yet. The months leading up to my departure were tense. My dad refused to talk to me. My mom kept dropping passive-aggressive comments about family loyalty and kids these days forgetting where they come from. Sarah told anyone who'd listen that I was running away from responsibility and abandoning the people who raised me. But I left. I got on that plane with nothing but 2 suitcases and a folder of documents tucked against my chest like a shield. And for the first time in my life, I breathed air that didn't feel like it was suffocating me. The years flew by. Florence became home. I learned Italian. I made friends. I got a degree in international relations and picked up side gigs translating for tourists and consulting for travel companies. I didn't get rich, not yet, but I built a life. One where I didn't feel like a disappointment or a burden. I sent the occasional email home, out of obligation more than anything, but they were always short and stiff. No one visited. No one asked me how I was doing. Not really. Then last month, I got an email from Sarah with the subject line, "Emergency, please call home." I ignored it. 2 days later, another one came through. This time from my mom. "Adam, it's important. Please, call me." I hesitated. Something in me wanted to delete it, but I didn't. I called. The voice on the other end was brittle, trying to sound warm, but faltering. "Hi, honey," my mom said. "How are you?" It was the first time she'd called me that in years. "I'm fine," I said. "What's going on?" She sighed, dragging it out like she was summoning the courage to confess something. "It's your Uncle Rick. He's in trouble. It's been on the news. It's embarrassing." I raised an eyebrow. "Okay. He was arrested. Some sort of fraud thing. It's all over the local channels. It's making our whole family look bad." I stayed silent. She continued, "Your dad and I were thinking, maybe it's time you came home. Maybe if people saw how well you've done, if you were around again, it could help repair the family name." I nearly laughed. After all these years, after everything they said, now they wanted me to come back and be their PR fix? "Come home, Adam," she said again. "We need you." I didn't answer. Not right away. My heart was pounding, not out of fear, but something else. Something colder. I didn't give my mom an answer on that call. I told her I'd think about it, which, in fairness, was more than she ever gave me growing up. After I hung up, I just stood there in my little one-bedroom apartment, staring at the cracked paint on the windowsill while the Florence traffic murmured outside. A Vespa buzzed down the street, and church bells chimed somewhere off in the distance, echoing like a heartbeat. That city had become more of a family to me than my blood ever had. The idea of going back, of stepping foot into that decaying house where ambition went to die? No, but still, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because I wanted to help them. I didn't. But I needed to understand what they were really after. I did a little digging. Turns out my Uncle Rick had been involved in a construction grant scandal. He'd falsified documents and pocketed over $600,000 from a local development program meant to renovate housing for veterans. It was national news. His mugshot was plastered everywhere, and the community backlash was brutal. He'd been the upstanding family man of our town for decades, deacon at the church, Little League coach, president of the Rotary Club. And now he was facing a dozen federal charges. The thing is, Rick wasn't just some uncle I barely knew. He was my dad's older brother. The favorite. The one everyone bragged about. My dad used to say, "You should be more like your Uncle Rick." He built something of himself. I guess that something was an empire of lies. I figured that was the end of it, until the third email came. This time from Sarah. She didn't waste time pretending to care. "Adam, come home. It's not a request. Mom and Dad are being dragged through the mud. People are questioning the whole family. You living overseas makes it look like we're running. If you cared at all, you'd show up and prove we're not a bunch of cowards." There it was. The real reason. They didn't want me. They wanted the optics of me. Their estranged son, the one who made it, to serve as a human press release. Proof that the Johnsons weren't just a bunch of crooks and losers. I ignored it. But then came the letter. A physical envelope. Handwritten. No return address. It showed up at my doorstep, care of my university's alumni office. Inside was a note from my dad. Short, sloppy handwriting. "Adam, you're still part of this family whether you like it or not. Don't forget who paid for your roof and food for 18 years. You owe us. Show your face. Do the right thing." Dad. I sat with that letter for a long time. Reread it over and over. The part that stuck with me wasn't the guilt tripping. It was the word, "oh." That word had been used my whole life. I owed them for clothes, for school, for feeding me. Like existing was some kind of debt I could never repay. I never asked to be born. I earned my way out. But that didn't matter to them. My freedom was something I'd stolen in their eyes. And still, I went. Not because I forgave them, not because I wanted to help, but because something in me wanted to look them in the eyes and see if they'd changed, or if I was just another pawn on the family chessboard. Plus, part of me wanted to see the fallout up close, like slowing down at a crash site. When I landed in Cincinnati, it was gray and cold. Mid-November. I hadn't told anyone my flight time. I Ubered straight to a hotel, not home. That house wasn't mine anymore. The next morning, I texted Sarah that I was in town. She responded instantly, like she'd been waiting for confirmation I wouldn't back out. Come by the house at 5. Everyone will be there. That should have been my first red flag. When I showed up, it was like stepping into a weird, alternate reality. The same beige siding on the house. The same cracked driveway. But the air felt tighter, as if the walls themselves were bracing for something. I walked through the front door and was immediately met with fake smiles. My mom hugged me like we hadn't spent years avoiding each other. My dad gave me one of those stiff nods like we were coworkers meeting in a break room. Then I saw them. Extended family. Aunts, cousins, people I hadn't spoken to in a decade. All crammed into the living room. Food on paper plates. Wine in plastic cups. Like it was a party. Turns out, it kind of was. They'd thrown a family dinner in my honor. But it didn't take long to realize it was a PR stunt. My mom introduced me to everyone as our Adam, our international scholar, our pride. She left out the part where they tried to sabotage every step I took to get there. My dad clapped me on the back and said, "See, this is what I've always wanted. Family back together." I smiled, nodded, and sipped the cheap wine. I played along. But I watched everything. Every conversation. Every side-eye. Every time someone brought up the scandal and then looked at me like I was supposed to fix it with my presence. Then came the moment that cracked it all open. I was in the kitchen, refilling my glass, when Sarah pulled me aside. She looked nervous. Sweaty. "Hey," she said. "So, we need a favor." Of course they did. She continued. "There's a community meeting next week. The press will be there. We're trying to show the town that the family still has some integrity. We want you to speak." "Speak?" I asked. "Yeah. About your accomplishments. Your degree. Your work overseas. Show them the Johnson name still means something. You're the success story, Adam. You're the one that made it." I stared at her. "I'm not your shield," I said. She laughed nervously. "Come on. It's just a few words. You don't even have to mention Rick. Just talk about how proud you are to be a Johnson." That did it. I leaned in and said, "You all spent years making me feel like garbage. Mocking me. Ignoring me. Acting like I was some mistake. And now, because your golden uncle tanked the family name, you want me to sweep it all up?" Sarah blinked. "Adam, this isn't the time for a pity party. This is about family." I walked away without responding. But it wasn't over. 2 days later, I found out they'd gone behind my back. I got a call from a local reporter. She said she was confirming my appearance at the town forum next week, that she'd been told I'd be speaking on behalf of the family. I never agreed to that. Turns out, Sarah had sent out an email blast to local news outlets, announcing that Adam Johnson, international consultant and former Florence scholar, would be making a public statement of support for the Johnson family. I was livid. I called her immediately. "You used my name without permission," I said. "We needed to get ahead of this," she replied. "You don't understand how bad things are here. People are pulling away from us. Our family name is a punchline, and you think dragging me into it fixes that? You owe us, Adam," she snapped. "After everything we did for you. The house. The food. The clothes. You wouldn't have survived without us." I paused, then said, "You're right. I survived you." And I hung up. I should have left then. But I didn't. Because at that point, it wasn't about escaping. It was about making sure they never tried to use me again. After that phone call with Sarah, I didn't slam the phone or yell. I didn't storm into their house or write some dramatic post on social media. I just sat down on the edge of the hotel bed, stared at my reflection in the black TV screen across the room, and let the silence press in. That was the moment I fully realized it. How little they knew me. How badly they'd miscalculated. They still thought I was the same scared, approval-hungry kid who used to hide library books under his mattress. But I wasn't that boy anymore. I'd changed. Grown. But they hadn't. Not one bit. And still, part of me cracked. Because for all the strength I'd built, all the distance I'd put between myself and their toxicity, standing in the middle of it again chipped away at my composure. It wasn't just what they'd done. It was how effortlessly they slid back into their old roles. Sarah, still acting like the queen of the family even after her life had stalled out in the same suburban rut. My mom, smiling through gritted teeth while manipulating everyone around her. My dad, bitter and silent unless he had something venomous to say. And all of them so quick to pretend none of it ever happened. No apologies, no accountability, just fake smiles and backhanded praise when it was convenient for them. And now, they were parading my name around like a trophy they'd earned. They hadn't earned a thing. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about that call from the reporter, about Sarah signing me up for a speech I never agreed to, about the way my dad's letter had framed everything like a transaction. I owed them. That word again. Like I was a loan they regretted taking out. The next morning, I called the reporter back. I calmly told her that I had not agreed to speak at the forum, and that any announcement stating otherwise was false. She was understanding, though clearly disappointed, said she'd reached out for comment from the family, and that Sarah had confirmed everything. I told her to check her facts before printing anything else. Then I hung up, and that was when I realized I couldn't just walk away. Not this time. Walking away had been my first escape. But this time, I needed to take something with me. My dignity, my narrative, my power. But before I could rebuild anything, I had to hit bottom. And it happened faster than I thought. 3 days later, I got an email from my former university's scholarship board. A brief, polite message. It had come to their attention that I had publicly aligned with a high-profile fraud scandal involving my family, and they wanted clarification. They attached an anonymous tip. Someone had sent them a link to a small-town news blog that featured Sarah's fake announcement, along with a photo of me at the family dinner. That dinner had been carefully staged, I realized. She'd probably taken a photo without me noticing and passed it off as a reunion event with my full support. The article claimed I was standing in solidarity with my family during a difficult time. I sat there staring at the screen, heat rising up my spine. This wasn't just manipulation anymore. This was reputation sabotage. I spent years building a name abroad, with my own sweat and sacrifice. And now, because my family was desperate to clean up their image, they were dragging me down with them. I tried to call Sarah. No answer. I messaged her, take down the article. Now, or I will. She left me on read. That week was brutal. I spent every day fielding awkward emails from old classmates, colleagues in Florence, even my boss from the tourism startup I freelanced for. All of them asking, some politely, some not, why I was suddenly involved in a scandal back home. It didn't matter that I hadn't done anything. The association alone was enough. For a few days, I completely shut down. I canceled meetings. Didn't respond to texts. I stayed holed up in my hotel room, alternating between anger and exhaustion, flipping between local news and silence, wondering if I'd made a mistake coming back at all. I thought about just flying back to Italy, starting over, again, but something in me wouldn't let go. Because this time, I wasn't 17. I had resources, skills, connections, and I had receipts. It started small. I combed through every email Sarah had sent me, every text, every voicemail. I flagged the one where she admitted to announcing my speech before I agreed. I saved screenshots of the article. I found old social media posts from high school where she publicly mocked me for being obsessed with foreign junk and always acting like he's better than the rest of us. I archived every single time they'd torn me down over the years, and now, every time they try to lift me up for show. Then, I started thinking bigger. I reached out to the alumni association that had helped fund my scholarship. I offered to write a public letter, on my own terms, clarifying the situation, stating that I had no involvement in my uncle's case, and that I was being used by estranged family members without my consent. I didn't want to drag anyone, but I wasn't going to let their lies sit. They agreed. I spent a full weekend drafting the letter. Honest, measured, calm. I talked about my background, about growing up in a house where dreams were ridiculed, about finding my way to Florence, about building a life brick by brick with no support. I didn't name names, but I left no room for interpretation. I sent it. They published it on the university's blog. And then something unexpected happened. It got picked up. A small educational newsletter reposted it. Then a travel blog. Then a LinkedIn editor reached out and asked if they could run a feature on students who broke away from toxic roots and found global success. I agreed. I told my story. All of it. Within 2 weeks, I'd gone from being a local supporter of a fraud family to an accidental symbol of resilience. And it didn't stop there. A professor from my old program in Florence reached out, said he saw the article, and invited me to guest lecture at a workshop for students navigating difficult family dynamics. I said yes. A recruiter from a nonprofit messaged me. They worked with kids from broken homes who wanted to study abroad but didn't know where to start. They asked if I'd be open to consulting. I said yes to that too. I was rebuilding. But this time, not in spite of my past, because of it. Still, I didn't forget what got me here. And I wasn't done. Sarah finally texted me after the blog post hit 1,000 shares. Really? You had to drag us through the mud like that? I didn't respond. Then came the real kicker. My mom called me, voice trembling. We saw the article, she said. You're embarrassing us. People are starting to ask questions about what we did to you. Can't you just let the past go? That was rich. Let it go. I said. You mean like how you let me go every single time I needed you growing up? She sniffled. You're not being fair. I let that hang there for a second. Then I said, neither were you. But at least I'm being honest. She hung up. I hadn't spoken to my father at all since arriving. I assumed he'd never call. And I was right. But then, a week later, I got a knock on the hotel door. It was him, standing there in his battered, old leather jacket, looking smaller than I remembered. Older, like the weight of everything had finally started dragging him down. Got a minute? He asked. I stepped aside. He walked in, slow and silent, like he wasn't sure he'd be welcomed. He didn't sit, just stood there, arms crossed, staring out the window. I didn't know Rick was doing all that, he said. I swear. I didn't answer. He glanced at me. You embarrassed the whole family. There it was. Not I'm sorry. Not you were right. Just you made us look bad. I shook my head. I didn't embarrass anyone. I just told the truth. He scowled. Sometimes the truth should stay in the family. I almost laughed. Like when you told me I'd never make it. That I was just a burden. He didn't reply. That silence told me everything. He didn't come to apologize. He came to guilt me. One last attempt to pull me back into the cycle. I stepped closer. Calm. Steady. You know what I owe you, Dad? I said. Nothing. Not a dime. Not a speech. Not my silence. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, but I cut him off. You don't get to use me anymore. None of you do. And I walked to the door. He stood there for a moment longer, then muttered, You'll regret this. I smiled. I already did. For years. He left. And that was the last time I saw him. But it wouldn't be the last time they heard from me. The funny thing about betrayal is that it doesn't always leave a scar you can see. Sometimes, it sits beneath your skin like an ember, quiet, glowing, waiting. And when the wind hits just right, it flares back to life. That's how I felt after my father's visit. After Sarah's silence. After my mother's guilt-wrapped phone call. I thought I was done with them, that I'd already climbed out of that hole. But standing in the middle of their wreckage, I realized I'd just been watching from the sidelines. And it was time to stop watching. I didn't want revenge for the sake of petty satisfaction. I didn't need to ruin them. They were doing a great job of that themselves. No, what I wanted was clarity. I wanted the truth to stand taller than their lies. I wanted to take back the narrative they tried to write for me, and then quietly, surgically, dismantle the foundation they'd built their fake pride on. But if I was going to do this, I had to be smart. I had to prepare. I started with information. Over the next week, I tapped into everything I'd learned in Italy, research, diplomacy, social strategy. First, I called a friend from university, Luca, who now worked for a nonprofit dealing with public transparency and corruption reporting. I told him everything. The scandal, the fake family rebranding, the news articles. He was fascinated. Adam, he said, you're sitting on a gold mine of hypocrisy. If you want to expose them, all you need is the right platform. He offered to connect me with a small network of independent journalists who specialized in family-connected fraud cases, people not tied to corporate media, people who listen. But I wasn't quite ready to go public. Not yet. First, I needed proof. Tangible, undeniable, boring proof. The kind you can't PR spin your way out of. So I did what no one expected. I went to visit Uncle Rick. He was out on bail and staying at home until trial. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I didn't call ahead. I just showed up at his house with a manila folder and a portable recorder in my pocket. He looked surprised to see me. Suspicious. Adam, he said, peeking through the screen door. Didn't think you were the visiting type. I'm not, I replied. But I've got a proposition. He opened the door wider, slowly. I'm listening. I want your side of the story, I said. The real one. Not the one your lawyers are pushing. Not the one the press is spinning. Yours. On the record. He frowned. Why? I shrugged. Let's just say I'm writing a piece. I've got some connections. And unlike your brother and his kids, I'm not here to pretend this never happened. That got his attention. He let me in. We sat at his kitchen table, still covered in mail, a few unopened bills, a half-finished crossword, and I hit record. He started slow, cautious. But as I asked more pointed questions, he opened up. Maybe it was ego. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe he thought I was the only one who actually wanted to listen. But he gave me everything. He talked about how the grant fraud started, how it wasn't his idea at first, how he got pulled in by a city official who later flipped on him. He talked about the bookkeeping tricks, the fake invoices, the money that passed through the family. That part made me pause. What do you mean, passed through the family? He hesitated, then leaned back. Let's just say, your dad wasn't as innocent as he's pretending to be. I didn't flinch, just nodded slowly. Go on. He did. Turns out my father had invested in one of the fake renovation companies Rick created. A shell corporation that did no work, filed no taxes, but funneled enough cash into the Johnson household to finance a brand new kitchen 2 years ago, complete with granite counters and custom cabinetry. I remembered that remodel. My mom had bragged about it nonstop on Facebook. Why'd he do it? I asked. He always acted like he hated you. Rick snorted. He hates that he's not me, that he couldn't pull it off himself. But he never turned down a check. The next 2 hours were a whirlwind. Rick never explicitly admitted guilt. He was too careful for that, but he danced right on the edge. Enough to give me a map. Enough to confirm that my father wasn't just complicit in the lie. He was a beneficiary. I left with 2 things, the recording and a photocopy of a suspicious invoice Rick gave me from the contractor who remodeled my parents' kitchen. It listed a job done for Johnson Household Renovation Package C, dated during the height of Rick's grant skimming period. I took it all back to my hotel and spent the rest of the night connecting dots. Next, I contacted a former classmate from high school, Melissa. She now worked in local government. We hadn't spoken since graduation, but I reached out anyway, explained the situation, and asked if she could pull up records on the city contracts Rick's companies had received. Adam, she said, this is dicey. Why do you want this? I'm protecting myself, I said. They've used my name once already. I won't let them do it again. She hesitated, but eventually agreed to help. 2 days later, she emailed me a zipped file of public contracts, most of which were redacted, but a few hadn't been updated yet. I cross-referenced every address, every company name, every contractor ID. I built a spreadsheet. I highlighted overlaps, patterns, links to my father's private Venmo transactions that were still public. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't dramatic. But it was solid. And I wasn't done. The next step was leverage. I called Sarah. She didn't answer, of course. So I sent her a simple message. We need to talk. Now. Or the next article with my name in it will include yours. She replied within 5 minutes. We met at a diner on the edge of town. She showed up in full damage control mode. Hair done, sunglasses, that same smug half-smile she used to wear in high school when she'd lie to our teachers and get away with it. Adam, she said, sliding into the booth across from me. You're being dramatic. I placed the folder on the table. Slowly, deliberately. Inside, I said, is everything you've been trying to bury under this fake family unity crap. The fraudulent company. The money trail. Dad's remodel invoice. Rick's near confession. Your emails to the press. Do I need to go on? Her face changed. Not all at once. Just slowly. Like a mask melting in the sun. I don't know what you think you're doing, she said quietly. I'm doing what you should have done years ago, I said. Cleaning house. She glanced at the folder. Is this a threat? I leaned forward. No. It's a choice. You want to keep parading the Johnson name around like it's a badge of honor? Fine. But from now on, you do it without mine. You retract every press release. You make a public statement clarifying that I was used without consent. You remove every post that even mentions me. And you don't speak to me or about me again. Ever. She looked like she wanted to argue. To twist it. To play victim. But I wasn't giving her room. If you don't, I added, I'll leak every bit of this. Not to the tabloids. Not to local gossip blogs. To the IRS. The city council. The fraud watchdogs who already flagged Rick. And trust me, once they start pulling threads, your husband's dealership loans and dad's side gigs, they won't survive the scrutiny. Silence. Thick and heavy. Finally, she nodded. Just once. You've changed, she said. I smiled. No, I just stopped pretending. By the time I left that diner, everything had changed, not because of a big public scene or some viral moment, but because the balance of power had finally shifted. For years, my family made me feel like I owed them something. Silence, loyalty, invisibility. But now, for the first time, they owed me. And they knew it. I didn't hear from Sarah after that meeting. True to her word, or more likely her fear, she issued a public retraction within 48 hours. A bland, carefully worded Facebook post buried between photos of her kids and a church fundraiser, saying there had been a misunderstanding regarding my involvement with the family's public statements and that she wanted to clarify that I had never agreed to speak on anyone's behalf. The local blog that had picked up the original article edited their piece, adding a half-hearted note about the correction. No apology, but I didn't need one. I had what I came for, public distance. A clean break. But I wasn't done. See, my family had spent their lives building a house of cards made from ego, guilt, and manipulation. I'd spent mine learning how to take things apart. Patiently, quietly, carefully. So that's exactly what I did. A week after Sarah's post went live, I sent a formal report to the City Grant Oversight Committee, attaching a packet of documents. Rick's recorded conversation with me, the suspicious invoice for the kitchen remodel at my parents' house, and a list of shell companies used in the fraud, one of which had my father's signature on a subcontractor's agreement. I didn't embellish anything. I didn't make any accusations I couldn't back up. I just gave them what they needed to look. And then I waited. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of second-guessing myself, wondering if I'd just stirred a pot that would never boil. Maybe they'd get away with it, like they always did. But then, one morning, I woke up to a message from Melissa, my old classmate in City Hall. You might want to check the local news today. I did. The city had announced a formal investigation into all renovation projects linked to Rick's development firm. Multiple addresses were flagged, and one of them, 47 Carver Avenue, my parents' house. They were officially under review for benefiting from a fraudulent contract. It wasn't an arrest. It wasn't handcuffs or sirens. But it was a spotlight, one they couldn't squirm away from. And it was just the beginning. Over the next 2 months, the story snowballed. More people came forward. Contractors who hadn't been paid, veterans whose housing projects were delayed or canceled. Local journalists started digging into tax records. That granite kitchen my mom loved to brag about. A photograph of it ended up in a news segment about luxury renovations funded by stolen grants. My father, ever the proud man, refused to talk to the press. But that didn't stop the fallout. The hardware store he worked at quietly removed him from their website and shifted him off customer-facing duties. My mom stopped going to church functions. Sarah's husband, whose car dealership depended on local goodwill, suddenly faced a wave of cancellations and refund requests. Someone had scrawled "thieves" in red paint across the dealership's front window one night. They tried to say it was just vandalism, but everyone knew. Even Uncle Rick, already neck-deep in legal trouble, tried to claim he'd been set up by family. He released a statement through his lawyer denying any involvement in additional contracts, but the damage was done. His plea deal fell through. The prosecution reopened parts of the case. He was eventually hit with 2 more charges for fraud and conspiracy. And me? I flew back to Florence. The day I left, I didn't visit anyone. I didn't tell them I was going. I just left my hotel key at the front desk, boarded my flight, and watched the clouds swallow Ohio. Back in Italy, the world felt lighter. Warmer, but not because I was running, because I had finally let it go, on my terms. I threw myself into work. The nonprofit I consulted for offered me a permanent role. I accepted. I started giving workshops for students who came from backgrounds like mine, kids whose families resented their dreams, kids who didn't know how to leave without losing themselves. I helped them build roadmaps. I showed them what survival looked like when it was paired with purpose. I even started writing. The same journalist who had once interviewed me about resilience asked if I'd consider turning my story into a column. I did. It wasn't angry or bitter. It was honest. I talked about small-town roots, about generational pride, about how sometimes family, is just a word people hide behind when they want to control you. The article went viral. Emails poured in. People from all over the world, thanking me for saying what they'd never dared to put into words. People who'd escaped, people still trapped. People who said, "Your story gave me courage. I wasn't just healing anymore. I was helping others do the same." And then, months later, I got a letter. Not a text, not an email, a handwritten letter. From my mother. I opened it slowly, expecting guilt or manipulation, maybe a veiled threat or a tear-stained apology. But what I found was worse. It was hollow. "We're disappointed in you," she wrote. "You humiliated us. You could have helped. Instead, you chose to destroy your own family. I hope you're proud of yourself." No mention of what they'd done to me. No acceptance. Just blame. I folded the letter and tucked it in the back of my closet. Not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder that sometimes the closure you're waiting for doesn't come wrapped in an apology. Sometimes it's just a final line in a chapter you're done rereading. I never wrote back. I never visited again. And every year since, when the anniversary of my departure rolls around, I do something small to celebrate. A walk along the river, a glass of wine, a quiet toast to the kid who left with 2 suitcases and a pocket full of doubt. Because that kid, he made it. Without them, despite them. And in the end, when they tried to drag me back into their mess, when they used my name like a shield, when they demanded silence, I answered with truth. And I never looked back. "You'll regret this," my father once said. He was wrong. They did.